People are desperate for Final Fantasy XVI, and can you blame them? With the game being revealed in September of last year, we've gone over 365 days without any significant update or new trailer, with the game's producer Naoki Yoshida saying he doesn't want half-baked updates about the game, and that the next time he delivers, he wants to show off something that looks a lot closer to a finished product. This is both a smart and admirable move, but it does not stop the circus known as the Final Fantasy fandom from still wanting more. We can't help it, it's our clown genetics. I'm a quarter Kefka on my mama's side. In either case, fans are now saying that Final Fantasy XVI might have already been teased. And at the PlayStation Showcase? Now you might be thinking that I watched that whole showcase and I didn't even see a crumb of Final Fantasy XVI. Well, if you recall the opening of the PlayStation Showcase, in which Sony showed an ad called Play Has No Limits, a sort of live-action CGI thing that Sony pretty much always does for ads. If you were to pause exactly at 37 seconds in, you can see a sign in the train station that says Valistia 616. For those who don't know or can't recall, Valistia is the name of Final Fantasy XVI's world, a world in which I so desperately want to go to. And many fans are thinking that 616 could actually be a tease toward the game's actual release date. Yeah, as in June 16. Of 2022, as in the idea that Final Fantasy XVI could be less than a year away. It sounds pretty exciting, but could that be what's actually going on here? Last year, around the time of reveal, we found out that Final Fantasy XVI had been in development in some form for at least 4 years, following the completion of Final Fantasy XV. Kind of hard to believe it's been that long since Final Fantasy XV already. Makes me feel like an old man. And since we found that out last year, that means that Final Fantasy XVI has been in development for about 5 years now, meaning that after that many years of work, you imagine that the game couldn't be that far off. And while I think that Final Fantasy XVI is much closer than some might imagine, I couldn't imagine that Sony would just secretly sneak the release date in there. Like the actual release date. While it would be an incredibly fun tease for fans, it just seems incredibly unrealistic for them to do. A lot of people are hoping to see the game at the Tokyo Game Show, though Yoshi P has made it quite clear that the likelihood of that happening is pretty slim. Not impossible, but it's also not very likely. Though if I'm honest, I'm a lot more under the assumption that it has to do with Final Fantasy XIV Endwalker. Creative Business Unit 3 is under an insane amount of pressure right now, and I feel like it's likely that they're prioritizing releasing Final Fantasy XIV Endwalker first, and then beginning the marketing for Final Fantasy XVI, launching it in the year in which there is no expansion for Final Fantasy XIV. It's worth noting that this is not the first time that Square Enix has done something like this. When director Tetsuya Nomura was working on both Kingdom Hearts 3 and Final Fantasy VII Remake at the same time, he insisted that Final Fantasy VII Remake would not get an update until Kingdom Hearts 3 was finished. And lo and behold, as soon as it was done, we got a large number of trailers back to back, and then with the game releasing in less than a year of its new reveal. I feel that Final Fantasy XVI is going to take a very similar path. Maybe a month or two after the release of Final Fantasy XIV Endwalker is when we're going to get the big marketing push for Final Fantasy XVI. And again, what better time to launch that than on and off expansion year? And at that point, Creative Business Unit 3 will be able to give all their love and attention to marketing Final Fantasy XVI. So honestly, I think next year will really be the year. But with all that said and done, Ultima, I want to hear from you. When do you think we'll next see Final Fantasy XVI? Subscribe, hit the bell icon, and let me know in the comments below. Shout out to patron Erica B and the rest of the Ultima community.